7 Tonight Show guests who arrived high as a kite. The Tonight Show's iconic blue curtain parts. Johnny Carson strides to his mark, delivers his monologue, and takes his seat behind the desk. For 30 years, this ritual played out with clockwork precision, television's most dependable nightly comfort. But behind that well-oiled machine lurked a chaotic reality that viewers rarely glimpsed, the unpredictable, sometimes alarming state of the celebrities waiting nervously backstage. Johnny had a sixth sense about it the moment they walked out, revealed a former Tonight Show producer who worked with Carson throughout the 1970s. He could tell within seconds if someone was drunk, stoned, coked up, or worse. His eyes would get this certain look, part amusement, part "oh God, here we go." While Carson maintained his legendary cool on camera, the reality behind the scenes was often far more dramatic. Production assistants were trained to watch for warning signs. Segment producers developed emergency backup plans. Executives occasionally hovered nervously in the wings. "We had code phrases," explained a former Tonight Show staffer. If Johnny touched his tie while introducing someone, it meant this person is not entirely sober. If he straightened his cards twice, it signaled the director to keep camera shots simple because our guest might be unpredictable. These subtle signals were part of an elaborate system developed over years to handle a situation viewers at home might never suspect. Major celebrities arriving at America's most prestigious talk show in states of significant chemical alteration. "The 70s were wild," admitted the former producer. "You'd have legitimate legends, Oscar winners, musical icons, literary giants showing up so impaired that they could barely remember their own names. Johnny somehow had to make it all look normal while essentially babysitting someone having an entirely different experience of reality." Most shocking was the story of the beloved cultural icon who arrived so obviously under the influence that NBC executives nearly pulled the plug mid-interview until Carson convinced them the audience thought it was all an elaborate comedy bit. Or the counterculture hero whose chemical assistance was so apparent that Carson later joked to his crew, "I think I got a contact high just sitting next to him." Let's order pizza for everyone. Today, we're uncovering the most infamous cases of celebrities who appeared on The Tonight Show while clearly under the influence, and the remarkable ways Johnny Carson handled these unpredictable, sometimes career-defining moments. But first, we need to understand the unique pressures that drove so many stars to chemical courage before facing television's most watched and most powerful interview. Thank you for coming. Friday night. Yeah. Okay. The Green Room, where nerves met substances. The Tonight Show's Green Room, where guests waited before their appearances, witnessed more pre-show anxiety than perhaps any other space in television history. "People don't realize the pressure," explained a former Tonight Show talent coordinator. Carson wasn't just any interview. A good appearance could launch careers overnight. A bad one could haunt you for years. And unlike today's pre-planned, heavily prepped talk show segments, Johnny wanted genuine, unplanned conversation. That terrified a lot of people. This pressure created the perfect environment for chemical assistance, whether alcohol from the always-stocked Green Room bar, pills from private stashes, or substances brought by entourages who knew their famous employers needed something to take the edge off. The Green Room bar was legendary, recalled a staff member who worked on the show in the 1970s and 80s. Carson himself approved the selection. Top shelf everything. The unofficial policy was that 1 drink was fine, 2 was pushing it, but enforcing that with major stars, good luck. Beyond alcohol, the era's more permissive attitude toward recreational substances meant that many celebrities arrived having indulged in their preferred method of relaxation, from marijuana to cocaine to prescription medications, often in combinations that became apparent once the cameras rolled. "You have to remember the context," noted a television historian specializing in late-night TV. This was when Studio 54 was at its peak. Rock stars were living like Roman emperors. Even Wall Street was awash in cocaine. The Tonight Show didn't exist in a vacuum. It reflected the culture of its time, including the substance use that permeated entertainment. Carson himself was known to enjoy a drink, but was famously in control on air. This created an interesting dynamic when interviewing guests who weren't exercising the same restraint. John had this remarkable ability to modulate his approach based on a guest state, explained his former producer. If someone was a little loose from drinks, he'd gently guide them through. If they were truly impaired, he'd simplify questions, help them along, and sometimes cut segments short while making it all seem natural. This adaptive approach would be tested repeatedly throughout Carson's tenure by guests who pushed the boundaries of broadcast acceptability, beginning with a counterculture icon whose chemical enhancement became part of his comedic persona, into a new lifestyle which doesn't require my presence, and so I can, if I don't want, I don't have to get up at all and I still get credit for a full day. George Carlin, the functioning stoner. George Carlin transformed from clean-cut comedian to counterculture hero during the early 1970s, growing his hair, changing his material, and embracing the era's drug culture. Changes reflected in his Tonight Show appearances. He riffed like a genius and grinned like a stoner. Remember the camera operator who worked many of Carlin's Tonight Show segments? There was never any question. George wasn't hiding it. That slightly glazed look in his eyes was practically part of his brand by then. Carlin appeared on The Tonight Show over 130 times, establishing himself as one of Carson's most reliable and popular guests. Yet, despite this apparent approval, Carson never selected him as guest host, a distinction many other comedians received. Johnny enjoyed George enormously and respected his brilliance, explained a former Tonight Show writer. But he wouldn't let him guest host. The unspoken reason was reliability. Johnny knew George's lifestyle and wasn't confident he could handle the responsibility of running the show for 90 minutes. What made Carlin unique among the high-flying guests was his functionality. Unlike others who became incoherent or unpredictable, Carlin remained sharp, witty, and professional, just with a distinctly relaxed vibe that regular viewers definitely noticed. Carlin was what we called a functioning herbalist, quipped a Tonight Show staffer who worked closely with guests. The weed didn't impair him. It was part of his creative process. He was still George Carlin, just a more mellow philosophical version. Carson's handling of Carlin revealed his pragmatic approach to the era's changing norms. While never explicitly acknowledging Carlin's state on air, Carson adapted his interview style, asking more open-ended questions that allowed Carlin's mind to wander in the fascinating, often hilarious directions that made him a counterculture hero. Johnny knew exactly what he was doing, noted the former producer. He tossed George a topic and then sat back, letting him riff. The results were often brilliant stream-of-consciousness monologues that wouldn't have happened if George had been entirely straight. Carlin himself later confirmed suspicions in his autobiography, writing, "Was I usually stoned during my Carson spots in the 70s? Of course I was. It was the 70s, and I was George Carlin. Do the math." While Carlin maintained his professional composure despite his chemical enhancement, our next subject demonstrated how quickly things could go sideways when a brilliant mind's substance use crossed the line from enhancement to impairment. My friend, thank you. They all mean it. You know that. I don't know where to start. I don't. First of all, how are you feeling? I feel. Laughter. Richard Pryor. Comedy's raw nerve exposed. If Carlin represented functional cannabis use, Richard Pryor embodied something more volatile. A genius comedian whose substance issues sometimes pushed Tonight Show appearances from brilliant to concerning in the blink of an eye. He was hilarious until he got cosmic, recalled a stage manager who worked several of Pryor's Tonight Show appearances. Richard could start a segment as the sharpest, funniest person on the planet. Then suddenly his eyes would change and he'd go somewhere else mentally. Johnny would have to work like a traffic cop to get things back on track. Pryor's relationship with substances was complicated and well documented. His cocaine use in particular became increasingly problematic throughout the 1970s, culminating in his infamous 1980 freebasing accident. Several of his Tonight Show appearances captured him at different points along this trajectory. One particularly memorable segment from 1978 started conventionally enough, with Pryor discussing his latest projects. Midway through, however, he began a joke about his childhood that gradually dissolved into a disconnected series of observations, his focus visibly drifting. The audience, unsure if this was an intentional comedic choice or something unplanned, laughed nervously. You could see Johnny shift into protection mode. The stage manager continued. He jumped in with a quick question to redirect Richard, made a joke to cover the awkward moment, then smoothly transitioned to a commercial. It was masterful crisis management disguised as casual conversation. Carson's handling of Pryor demonstrated his deep respect for the comedian's talent alongside concern for his well-being. Unlike some hosts who might have exploited an impaired guest for laughs, Carson worked to showcase Pryor at his best while minimizing his vulnerable moments. Johnny genuinely loved Richard's genius, explained a former NBC executive familiar with their relationship. He wasn't judgmental about the substances. That wasn't Carson's style, but he worried about Richard self-destructing. He'd sometimes check on him through mutual friends after particularly erratic appearances. What made Pryor's high appearances distinct from some others on the list was the unpredictability. His brilliance remained intact, but his focus and filter became increasingly unreliable, creating moments that walked a tightrope between comedy gold and broadcast concern. Carson had a unique approach with Richard, noted his former producer. He'd let him fly when the material was working, then create a safety net when things started going sideways. It was like watching a master animal trainer working with a magnificent but unpredictable big cat. While Carson maintained a protective approach toward talents like Pryor and Carlin, his patience had limits, as the next subject discovered when his impaired state crossed the line from concerning to unprofessional. That was a double execution that night, and it took all about an hour and a half from the time that the thing started till it was over. Truman Capote, literary genius, television disaster. Not all chemically enhanced Tonight Show appearances involved the controlled chaos of comedians. Sometimes the most alarming incidents came from unexpected sources, like the distinguished literary icon whose 1980 appearance became legendary for all the wrong reasons. America's literary darling, completely baked, was how one production assistant succinctly described Truman Capote's infamous Tonight Show disaster. Capote had appeared on the show many times over the years, usually displaying the sharp wit and keen observations that made him a talk show favorite. But his January 1980 appearance was different from the moment he wobbled onto the set. He was slurring so badly you could barely understand him, recalled a sound technician who waked that night. His head kept nodding forward. Then he'd snap back to attention with this startled look. The control room was panicking. They kept cutting to Johnny's reaction shots because at least those were coherent. Unlike his handling of Carlin or Pryor, where Carson adapted to their altered states with good humor, his response to Capote's condition was markedly different. Viewers at home saw Carson's smile tighten and his questions simplify as he attempted to salvage what was quickly becoming an unbroadcastable segment. Johnny was furious, revealed his former producer. Not on air, of course. He was too professional for that. But the moment they cut to commercial, he stormed backstage and told the talent coordinator, "Never again. He's done." What particularly angered Carson wasn't just Capote's impairment, but what it represented, a lack of respect for the show and its audience. While Carson tolerated the creative chemical assistance of certain performers, Capote's apparent combination of pills and alcohol had rendered him essentially non-functional as a guest. There's a difference between someone who's a little high and can still perform versus someone who's incapacitated, explained the former NBC executive. Capote crossed that line. He wasn't just relaxed or uninhibited. He was barely conscious. The Capote incident led to tighter backstage monitoring of guests' conditions before they went on air. Staff were instructed to alert producers if a guest appeared significantly impaired, and the green room bar service became more carefully regulated. Capote would never again appear on The Tonight Show during Carson's tenure. One of the few guests to receive a lifetime ban, the incident served as a cautionary tale within the show about the limits of Carson's famous tolerance. While Capote represented substance use gone wrong, the next entries approached their chemical assistants with the straightforward honesty that defined their public personas. Fantasies. Here are the distinguished motion picture stars, Mr. Thomas Chong and Mr. Richard Murrin, better known as Cheech and Chong. Cheech and Chong, truth in advertising. Some Tonight Show guests made no pretense about their relationship with recreational substances. None more famously than comedy duo Cheech Murrin and Tommy Chong, whose entire brand was built around cannabis culture. They weren't acting. That's just where their brains lived, laughed a former segment producer who worked on several of their Tonight Show appearances throughout the late 1970s and early 1980s. What made Cheech and Chong unique among the high-flying guests was Carson's willingness to essentially incorporate their state into the comedy. Rather than working around or disguising their obvious cannabis consumption, Carson would play the straight man to their stoner antics. Johnny would put on this exaggerated square persona with them, recalled a former writer. He'd pretend not to understand their drug references, asking innocent questions that set them up perfectly. It was this wonderful comedy dance where everyone, the guests, Johnny, and the audience, was in on the joke. During one memorable appearance promoting their film Up in Smoke, Chong began a rambling, disconnected anecdote about the movie's production. Rather than redirect or rescue him, Carson simply let the story unspool, occasionally glancing at the camera with a raised eyebrow that had the audience howling. Johnny knew exactly what he was doing, explained the segment producer. He was essentially telling the audience, yes, they're exactly who you think they are. It wasn't about exposing or embarrassing them. It was about authenticating their brand. The contrast between the buttoned-up Carson and the openly stoned comedy duo created some of the show's most entertaining segments of the era. Carson would occasionally feign confusion about their more explicit drug references, creating comedic tension that both parties clearly enjoyed. There was mutual respect there, noted a cameraman who worked the shows. Johnny appreciated their honesty, and they appreciated that he let them be themselves instead of forcing them into a more sanitized version for television. This approach reflected Carson's broader philosophy about his guests. He wanted them to be authentic, even if that authenticity occasionally pushed the boundaries of what network television typically allowed in the 1970s. Carson always said his job was to make guests look good. His former producer explained. With Cheech and Chong, making them look good meant letting them be exactly who they were. Two guys who smoke a lot of weed and were funny as hell because of it, not despite it. Who don't like, Dennis and me and Bert Schneider out there in California. Yeah. Peter Fonda, easy rider, difficult guest. The counterculture revolution of the 1960s brought new substances and new attitudes into the mainstream, sometimes colliding spectacularly with the conventions of network television, as happened during Peter Fonda's now legendary 1970 appearance. He talked about time travel. The segment lasted 5 minutes, recalled a director who worked on the show that night, succinctly summarizing one of the most bizarre interviews in Tonight Show history. Fonda, already famous for Easy Rider and his open advocacy of psychedelics, arrived for his scheduled appearance seemingly under the influence of what staffers strongly suspected was LSD. From the moment he walked on stage, it was clear this wouldn't be a standard interview. His pupils were the size of dinner plates, remembered a camera operator. He kept staring at the lights, then at his hands. Then he'd suddenly snap back and try to answer Johnny's question from 30 seconds earlier. It was like watching someone tune in and out of our dimension. Carson, recognizing the situation immediately, shifted into what his team called damage control mode, asking extremely simple questions, keeping a pleasant but neutral expression, and looking for the earliest appropriate moment to end the segment. The breaking point came when Carson asked about Fonda's upcoming projects, a standard talk show question designed to promote the guest's work. Fonda began a response about a new film, then abruptly shifted to discussing how time isn't linear, but wrapped around us like a blanket, and how we're all just riding the cosmic wave of consciousness. Johnny gave the signal, said the director. He tapped his cards twice on the desk, our emergency code for cut to commercial immediately, no matter where we are in the segment. They were only about 5 minutes into what was supposed to be a 12-minute interview. When they returned from the break, Fonda had been replaced by the next guest with no explanation. Carson simply continued as though nothing unusual had occurred, a testament to his unflappable professionalism. Carson wasn't angry afterward, just pragmatic, the director continued. He told the producers, let's give him another chance in a year or so. Everyone has off nights. That was Johnny. No judgment, just practical solutions. Fonda would indeed return to The Tonight Show in later years, delivering more conventional interviews. The incident became part of Tonight Show lore, an example of the unpredictable reality of live television in an era when the boundaries between mainstream entertainment and counterculture were increasingly blurry. While Fonda's psychedelic journey created an unintentional comedy of errors, our next subject's chemical enhancement led to something less amusing, aggression that crossed the line from entertaining to uncomfortable. It now very expensive in the Isle of Man. Apparently somebody's got to give to the government of the Isle of Man a great deal. Oliver Reed, the British Bulldog Unleashed. Not all chemically enhanced Tonight Show appearances were played for laughs. Some, like British actor Oliver Reed's infamous 1975 visit, demonstrated how quickly substance use could transform entertainment into concern. He made headlines in no sense, said a former NBC page who witnessed Reed's volatile appearance. The man was clearly drunk, possibly on other things, too, and Johnny went from amused to alarmed in about 90 seconds. Reed, already known in Britain for his hard-drinking, hard-living persona, arrived for his Tonight Show appearance visibly intoxicated. What started as slurred but manageable responses quickly escalated as Reed became increasingly animated and unpredictable. You could see Johnny's expression change when Reed started getting loud, recalled the stage manager. Carson had this amazing ability to read guests, and you could tell the moment he realized, this isn't just a guy who had a few drinks. This is someone volatile who might do anything. The situation deteriorated when Reed began interrupting Carson's questions with non sequiturs and occasional shouts. At one point, he stood up unexpectedly and began demonstrating a fighting stance, causing visible concern among crew members. The tension in the studio was incredible, remembered a cameraman. Security guys moved closer to the stage. Johnny kept his cool outwardly, but you could see his body language change. He was ready to move if needed. Carson's handling of Reed demonstrated a different skill than his management of more benign high-flying guests. Rather than playing along or gently guiding the conversation, he took fine control, interrupting Reed's rambling, redirecting forcefully, and ultimately cutting the segment significantly short. Johnny had zero tolerance for aggressive or threatening behavior, regardless of the cause, explained his former producer. He could handle someone being stoned or a little drunk, but the minute it turned hostile or unpredictable in a threatening way, he shut it down. After the appearance, Carson made his feelings clear. Oliver Reed would not be invited back to The Tonight Show. This decision reflected Carson's boundary between entertaining television and potentially dangerous situations. Carson told the booking staff afterward, "I don't care how big a star someone is. If they can't control themselves, they don't sit at my desk," revealed the former talent coordinator. Oliver Reed joined a very short list of performers who were permanently banned from the show. Reed's cautionary tale demonstrated the fine line between chemical enhancement that created memorable television and intoxication that threatened the show's carefully maintained atmosphere of civilized conversation. A line our final subject was rumored to have danced near during one of the most talked-about appearances of the era. "Well, you must have told him where we were 'cause somebody came and got it." Sammy Davis Jr., the Ultimate Entertainer's secret fuel. Some Tonight Show appearances became legendary not for obvious impairment, but for the whispered rumors that followed. None generated more persistent speculation than Sammy Davis Jr.'s hyperkinetic 1974 interview that had viewers wondering what exactly was powering the legendary entertainer. "Cool on stage, chaos backstage," summarized a production assistant who worked that night, capturing the contrast between Davis's polished performance and the frenetic energy that surrounded his appearance. Davis was a Tonight Show regular and one of Carson's favorite guests, a consummate entertainer whose combination of musical talent, comedy chops, and fascinating life stories made him television gold.